We are here this afternoon to mark a long and well-lived life, the life of Joseph Bogage, 97 years old, who lived a life of deep integrity, who was a man who came from a large family and has, as you can see, spawned a large family. And I know that from my conversations with the family, having all of you here and friends as well, and friends of family members will be exactly what Joseph would want. That's where he was most happy, was when he was surrounded by his family. We often don't know exactly what to say when we are at a funeral and during a time of loss, and what words will bring comfort. Our tradition teaches us to look to the book of Psalms. And so from Psalm 15, Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai miyagor bo'alacha miyishkon b'har kodechecha, holech tamim u'po atzedek v'dover emet b'lvavaho, lo ragala l'shono v'lo asa rehu ra'aha v'chirpa lo nasa al krovaho, nivzeh be'einav nim'as v'yirei Adonai yichabehed, nishba l'hara v'lo yamir, kaspo lo natan b'neshech v'shochad al naki lo lakahach, Ose ela lo yimot la'olam. Who deserves to walk into God's holy sanctuary? Who can merit a place in the presence of God? One who lives their life with integrity, who does what is right, who speaks the truth without deceit, who has no slander upon his tongue, and does no evil to others, who does not mistreat his neighbor nor spurn a contemptible person, but honors those who revere the Lord, who never retracts a promise once made, even if it were to bring him harm, who lends no money at unfair rates, accepts no bribe against the innocent. One who makes these deeds their own shall stand firm forever. Words that truly could have been written for Joseph. We'll turn now to Psalm 23 and the cantor will offer, who I know Joseph loved to hear her voice, to hear her sing for so many years on holidays and other times of celebration.
Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar, binat asher yorbitzeni, al mei menuchot yenaleni. Nafshi yeshovev, nafshi yeshovev, yancheni v'magle tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech beget salmavet, lo irara ki ata imadi, shiftecha umishantecha, shiftecha umishantecha, hema yenachamuni, tahara לפני שולחן, תערוך לפני שולחן, תערוך לפני שולחן, נגד צוררי, תשענת ושמן ראשי, תשענת ושמן ראשי, תשענת ושמן ראשי, כוסי רוויה. אך טוב החסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me to lie down in green pastures and leads me beside the still waters. God restores my soul and guides me in straight path for God's name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We'll now have an opportunity to hear from some of those who knew Joseph best, members of his family. First, we'll begin with his son, Alan.
I'll try to do this. Difficult, as you know. I'm glad so many of you can make it today. Let me get my glasses. So 97 years, amazing, right? It's a long life, and 75 years married, which is even more amazing to me. Lots of memories and lots of identities in all those years. Joe was dad, grandpa, Grandpa Joe, once I became grandpa, Yussel, Uncle Joe, Mr. Bogage, Joe, and probably most importantly, Shirley and Joe, right? As one unit. So good memories and bad, but of course today we'll think of the good times. Lots of holidays, every single birthday, awkward seders, awkward Thanksgivings, vacations on LBI, and on, 97 years worth. How he loved going to all those boring, interminable graduations. Nancy and I worked at a college, so we went to so many graduations, and we were jaded about that. In his way, Dad taught me a love of reading, of education, of boating, of Long Beach Island, of all things chocolate, but somehow his commitment to marriage didn't quite rub off. Well, he also taught me to be a Democrat, a liberal Democrat. So here's an interesting story about that. When I was young, I used to go to anti-Vietnam War protests in D.C. with my friends. And so this one time, we got tear gassed. So we're running away, and me and Bruce Fink, Bruce will remember him, Bruce Fink, where do we run? We run up 7th and F Street, where the Heck Company was, where my father was working. So these long-haired hippie guys run up to his office, and he wasn't mad. He was concerned, but he was not mad. And I think there was part of him that knew the war was unjust. And there was that part of him that, I think he wanted me to participate in these anti-war demonstrations for him as a way of expressing that. Because he never gave me a lot of flack about going to these anti-war demonstrations. So we waited around the Heck Company all day after that, and then he gave me and Bruce a ride home. So Dad was a quiet person, and he had a strange, sarcastic sense of humor, which I think rubbed off on me. We had our differences, but once I became an adult and had a family, we didn't really go there, wherever there was. He loved his family. It wasn't real demonstrative, but he did love us all. So I want to share a couple happy memories, both dealing with boating. The last time I went fishing with him, years ago, we were vacationing on LBI, and somehow it was just Dad and me. I think Nancy and Barry were probably at the beach or something. So we rented a rowboat with one of those little motors, and we went out fishing, and all we caught was eels. Gross, slimy, slithering eels that neither of us wanted to touch, and all we could do was laugh about it. So finally, after about the third or fourth eel, we said, forget this, and we headed back in. And I wonder if he would have remembered that. I hope he would have. Again, another similar story. A long time ago, we went canoeing. I keep my canoe at Liberty Reservoir outside Baltimore. And it shows you how long ago it was that he could actually sit in a canoe. And again, it was just he and I. So we get to my canoe, we turn it over, and there's a snake in the canoe. So again, we look at each other and laugh and go, who's going to deal with this snake? Who's going to chase the snake out? So eventually we got a stick and chased it out. But two memories that just came to me, and then we had a real good day on the lake. They reminded me of some of the good times we had together. So let me finish with some poetry. I think most of you know that I'm into poetry. And one of the standard poems that's read during a eulogy is Dylan Thomas's "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." But I prefer this poem by Jane Kenyon, which she wrote shortly before her death when she was dying of cancer. And I read it as more of a gentle poem, as an acceptance of mortality, and it's called "Let Evening Come." I used to know it by heart, but I'm not even going to try that now. Let the light of late afternoon shine through the chinks in the barn, moving up the bales as the sun moves down. Let the cricket take up chafing as a woman takes up her needle and her yarn. Let evening come. Let dew collect on the hoe, abandoned in the long grass. Let the stars appear, and the moon disclose her silver horn. Let the fox go back to its sandy den. Let the wind die down. Let the shed go black inside. Let evening come. To the bottle in the ditch, to the scoop in the oats, to the air in the lung, let evening come. Let it come as it will, and do not be afraid. God does not leave us comfortless, so let evening come. And I think by not leaving us comfortless, I think the poet means that we, the mourners, are not left comfortless, that we have one another to comfort us. So, thank you.
We'll now hear from his daughter, Nancy.
Hello, I'm Nancy, his daughter, and I'm shaking so much. You can probably hear it in my voice, but I only wanted to say a couple of things. I'm going to miss my dad. And if you would have asked me that when I was 17 years old, you would have never thought I would live to say those words. But I'm going to miss my dad, and he gave me a lot of things, and for decades, literally decades, he has passed on the New York Times Book Review and the Sunday New York Times Magazine to me many years after I had access to them digitally. And I could never break his heart by. I actually read them more thoroughly in the paper form, but I'm grateful for the things he gave me. My love of the Bogage family, the great joy and fun and just unmatchable love that I always experienced among his cousins and still do. And I thank him for that and for LBI, Surf City, wonderful time we all have. For, I guess, for my sweet tooth, although I could have done without that. And I'm gonna miss him. I'm gonna miss his cute little smile and his curly hair, and I just know that he really tried to stay with my mom, but you know, it was time. And he was a good man, and I thank him for being a good dad.
Now we'll hear from his grandson, Jacob.
Hi, folks. You'll have to forgive me if you catch me smiling up here because there is something gratifying about a job well done. And I think this is very much what he had in mind. I'd like to begin by sharing a story, not about Grandpa. And it's one of my favorites, and it's one that some of you, knowing me as a geek, have probably heard me tell before, about what it is to be an American Jew and what that says about my grandfather and about all of us in our own way. In 1790, we're going way back, in 1790, George Washington visited, Aaron, deal with it, visited Newport, Rhode Island, which is where my brother Aaron and my soon-to-be sister-in-law Andrea will be married in May. And the civic leaders of the town were asked to read him letters of welcome. And they gathered in front of the grandest building in the town, which was the synagogue, because Jews had been in Newport for generations upon generations, the oldest permanent settlement of Jews in North America. And the warden of the congregation, a man by the name of Moses Satius, read a letter from the Jews of Newport to the new president. And he uses that letter not just to welcome the president, but to advocate on behalf of American Jewry. And I'm going to read from it. For all these blessings of civil liberty, of civil and religious liberty, which we enjoy under an equal and benign administration, we desire to send up our thanks to the angel who conducted our forefathers through the wilderness into the promised land, who may graciously conduct you through all the difficulties and dangers of this mortal life. And when you, like Joshua, full of days and full of honor, are gathered to your Father, may you be admitted to the heavenly paradise and partake of the water of life and the tree of immortality. And that's my grandfather, full of days and full of honor. We're going to say this a million times. He lived to 97 years old. The U.S. life expectancy the year of his birth, 1926, was 58 years. By the time he was a toddler, the Bogages had established our fondest tradition, which, as we will say many times, was summer at Surf City. And my father and I talk about this every year, and I think we should talk about it more, because it is moving and incredible to think that the generation, his parents, who had come to America seeking religious refuge, economic opportunity, had a middle working class lifestyle that somehow meant they had a place down the shore. We underestimate the meaning of that. They left the shtetl and the pogroms and the early warnings of genocide and found this stability. And it seemed proof of the promise, that the promise of America was real, that Jews were part of the national fabric, and that my grandfather would grow up in that nation of opportunity. And that was, of course, upended by the Second World War. He enlisted in the Navy immediately upon graduating high school. He was too young to do so on his own. He had to beg his mother to sign. And the year was 1944. By the accounts he shared, he was not a good soldier. During a training exercise in San Diego, he loved this story. He had strict orders as a radio man to protect his radio, which is about the size of a mini fridge. So think about 3 times the size of this. And protect this at all cost, please. And he took up a position behind dunes on the beach, well away from where tanks and heavy artillery were operating, only to see a tank rise up above the dune that he was perched behind. And he and his assistant radio man ditched the thing and ran for it, only to see it get rolled over and destroyed. In serving in the Navy, my grandfather was forced, like the generations before him, to start over. No college, no higher education. That promise of economic opportunity that was the foundation of his parents coming to this country was dimmed. And he had to go earn a living. Upon his discharge from the Navy, I don't know if he loved to tell the story, but we love to tell the story about him. He threw his uniform in the harbor, and he kept his sailor's cap, which we need to go find now. I don't know where it is. And the year was 1946. 3 years later, he married my grandmother. They were engaged New Year's Eve, 1948. Aaron, you know this story. It was in the moments before walking into a New Year's party. And I once asked, whose party was it? What did you say? What were you, do you remember any details? No, he had no idea. My brother, a moment later, says, it was in the front seat of a car. What kind of car was it? A 47 black Studebaker. My grandpa was a car guy. He moved his family all over the Northeast, wherever there was better paying work. And when my father was 4 years old, that would have been 1961, they moved to Baltimore, part of a deal with my grandmother to finally settle down. But we all know Grandpa really never settled down. This is a weird deep cut, but in 1992, as Bill Clinton was running for president, he talked about his grandparents in a campaign video. And that's how you know I'm a geek, I know this. And they were from this little town in rural Arkansas, and I'll read what the future President Clinton said. They didn't go around and see the world and become broad-minded. They did it out of the depth of their experience and their heart. And my grandfather did go see the world. But he was also worldly out of the depth of his character. He was addicted, and Uncle Alan mentioned it, addicted to learning. Read newspapers cover to cover every day. He audited classes at the University of Maryland with my cousin Stacy. Where are you, Stacy? There you are. My brother and I spent at least a week every week after school, from the time we were in second grade until we were juniors in high school. And he would sit at the kitchen table with us until we convinced our parents to let us do it on Friday so we didn't have to do homework. But he would sit at the kitchen table with us and just watch us do our homework. And it took me years to realize that's because he was doing the math problems in his head so he could help us, because he was just addicted to that. He loved the internet and Twitter above all, which is a word I never thought I would say on this bema. His first tweet, he must have confused the search tab with the tweet button, because the entire post was Israel, ? His second tweet, this is a true story, his second tweet was at NBC TV studios, why all the loud music on NCIS? He was unceasingly proud of his children and grandchildren. He has a peculiar way of showing it, but he was unceasingly proud. We were all, at our own times, his favorites, until Elena went to medical school. And then she was the obvious favorite. I'd like to think he was proudest of the fact that we all stayed so close, both emotionally and geographically, that we could come together easily and seamlessly as we are today. The first time I introduced my wife, Danny, to my grandparents, I told her the 4 of us would be getting lunch at the condo in Olney. And we showed up and the table was set for 8. And my dad was coming, my Aunt Nancy was coming, Paul showed up, I think Aaron was supposed to come. And we left, and Danny said, you didn't have to ambush me with your extended family. If you wanted me to meet them, you could have just said, I want you to meet them. But that's just the way it was. We all were dropping in and out all the time. When I think about my grandfather, I think not just about the man, I think about the through line that connects me and him and the generations. My grandfather was a moral authority in my life, an embodiment, if not always a perfect example, of what was right and wrong. And Rabbi Hillel, I have to do something Jewish here, Rabbi Hillel, the great Jewish philosopher, famously said the whole of Torah was the golden rule. Treat others the way you wish to be treated, and the rest is commentary. And that was my grandfather in a particular sort of way. It didn't mean not challenging people in conventions. It meant that everything and everyone deserved to be challenged and evaluated and measured against the standard of tikkun olam, the Jewish obligation of repairing the breaches in the world. His grandfather, Nachman Yosef, was a Melamed and a Magid. It was a teacher and a spiritual leader in the village where they lived in what is now modern Ukraine. His father was a rabbi. His father was a rabbi. My cousin Estelle, where are you, Estelle? My cousin Estelle, the flower gal at my wedding, the flower girl at my grandparents' wedding, writes on our Bogage.com family history, which I am probably the most fond user of. The Boguslavsky family business, so to speak, was based on learning, teaching ideas, and communicating that to the people of the community. This is the lineage from which my grandfather constructed the way he went through the world. And it connected him in a life of loyalty and service to our family, to his community, to the generations, and indeed to the American experiment. I should say my favorite thing about the letter Moses Seixas wrote to George Washington is that President Washington wrote back, "May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid." It was incumbent upon the generations to protect that promise for us, to set an example, to secure that in perpetuity. And that's what my grandfather did for me in a life that was full of days and full of honor.
Thank you to Alan and to Nancy and to Jacob for your moving words. I'm sure it's not the first time it's been said. It's also nice to have a reporter in the family. Jacob described beautifully so many of the details of Joe's life, and I'll just add in a few more points. I actually just want to also say, if you haven't yet read online the obituary that Jacob wrote, I strongly commend it to you. It includes even more and more stories that help give an even a more full look at his life. I had the honor and pleasure to sit with Shirley and Joseph about a year or so ago, finally, after coming out of COVID. What struck me then was what struck me about everyone's description of Joseph. He was a kind and humble man who didn't always speak a lot, but whose actions spoke louder than words, and as Jacob talked about, conveyed the values that were most important to him: hard work, education, and most importantly, family. And boy, did he have a lot of family. Jacob and I didn't coordinate on this, but in many ways, Joseph Bogage's story mirrors the story of the American Jewish community. Born in Trenton, New Jersey on August 26, 1926, to Lazar and Rebecca, Becky, and Louis Bogage, immigrants from Ukraine, Yussel, as he was known then, grew up surrounded by a large family and a strong community. As you heard, Joe didn't have a chance to complete his college education, only was able to take a few classes, and that was always something that bothered him. After serving in the Navy in Hawaii and the South Pacific during World War II, he tried to attend college at NYU, but he had to leave to go work in the family business. Joseph met Shirley when she was just 16 years old. He was 20. They were married when he was 22 and she was 18. Barry, Alan, and Nancy remember them being true partners in every sense of the word. Joseph was totally devoted to Shirley as she was to him. They had an incredible relationship, fiercely devoted to each other. Whatever they did, whatever decisions they made, they did so as a couple. And we know tomorrow would have been their 75th wedding anniversary. After being together since they were 16, it's hard for anybody to be able to think of one of them without the other. In the coming days, months, and God willing, many years, surely know that your family, your community will be there for you as you and Joseph have been there for them. Joseph was a proud man, never wanting to get help from others, even as he started getting older, resisting a cane, then the walker, and especially the wheelchair in the last year. But I don't think, from what I heard, the pride was ego so much as a determination that I can do this for myself. Because he wasn't one to brag of his own accomplishments, such as his service in the Navy and the many awards that he received, the American Theater Medal, the Victory Medal, the Asiatic Pacific Medal, and Philippine Liberation Medal. Jacob writes in the obituary online that he said, "I won those? Why didn't anybody give them to me?" That wasn't what was important for him. While he was proud of while he worked hard as a top buyer at Hex in men's clothing, that was simply doing his job. His real source of pride were, as we've heard, his children, his grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, all of their accomplishments. And even then, he may not have shared that pride with them through words, but he did through his actions. As long as he was able, well into his 80s, he never missed a graduation, as we heard, nor a swim meet, a baseball game, a basketball game, a cheerleading competition, or any of the other activities that the grandchildren were involved with. I know he would have loved to have been able to celebrate at Jacob's and Lena's, each of their weddings, and at Aaron and Andrea's upcoming wedding, because that was where he found joy. When thinking about the times that made Joseph happy, Barry, Nancy, and Alan recalled the many family gatherings, the weddings, bar bat mitzvahs, holiday celebrations, hanging out at Uncle Joe's store, and most especially the summers on the Jersey Shore, the annual family tradition dating back 100 years, and that continues to this day. Each summer, members of the family would gather at Surf City on Long Beach Island. Joseph, who loved to swim, was at his best when he was out in the ocean with his children and grandchildren. He credited his longevity when I met with him, at least in part, to his daily swimming for as long as he was able. The other picture that came to mind when thinking about Joseph was sitting in a chair with his newspaper on his lap and a mug of coffee in his hand. Perhaps it was to make up for the lack of formal education that Joseph read the Baltimore Sun, the New York Times, and then the Washington Post and Washington Jewish Week every day, cover to cover. He did not miss a word, especially if it was Jacob who was writing. And even towards the end, Whenever it looked like Joseph was not going to make it, somehow he would rally, sit up, ask for his cup of coffee, read his paper, and everything was okay. And as we heard, he found his way during retirement to study, to make up for those lost years on campus by auditing as many classes as possible at the University of Maryland. And while he was happy to learn whatever he could, he especially enjoyed classes in Jewish history. He strongly identified with the Jewish community throughout his life and had a deep love for Israel. He and Shirley had opportunity to go and visit, which was one of the more important trips in his life. They were active members of Temple Israel on University Avenue, and Barry's wedding was actually the final celebration before the merger with what was then known as Beth Tikva, which resulted in where we are sitting today, Tikvat Israel. Joseph was especially proud to celebrate Jacob and Aaron's B'nai Mitzvah here in this sanctuary. Looked a little different, I think, at the time. Like so much in his life, Joseph didn't talk about his Judaism very much. He showed it through his actions. We heard through the values of Tikkun Olam, and he was kind to all, except perhaps late in the afternoon on Yom Kippur. Heard he could be a little scary at that time, but that was truly the exception to the rule. In a famous letter to his son, the 13th century scholar Nachmanides wrote, "I shall explain how you should become accustomed to the practice of humility in your daily life. Let your voice be gentle and your head bowed. Let your eyes be turned earthwards and your heart heavenwards. See the greatness and show reverence to each person. If he is wise or rich, you have reason to respect and learn from him. If he is poor and you are richer or wiser than he, remind yourself that when you err, it is on your account, but when he errs, it is out of ignorance." I think about this when I was listening to the stories as people described Joe, a wise man, a hardworking man, an athletic man, a family man. But in all those roles, he was a humble man. And in our tradition, humility is held as the greatest of all personality traits. So much so that in the Talmud, Rabbi Yochanan teaches that wherever one finds the might of the Holy One, one also finds God's humility. Strength and humility. This is Joseph Bogage. A loyal citizen, a hard worker, a good friend, a devoted husband, a proud father, grandfather, great-grandfather. A man of God, we return him to your loving care. To Shirley and Nancy and Steve and Alan, Barry, Elena, Casey, Jacob, Paul, Aaron, Sam, Anna, your spouses and partners, children and grandchildren, nieces and nephews and cousins, we all share in the pain of your loss of Joseph Bogage, Shlomo Yosef, Ben Lezer Verivka, and we pray for your consolation. In just a moment, we'll be asking you to rise as you're able as we recite the prayer, El Malei Rachamim, asking for God's, the compassionate one, to bring Joseph into God's loving care. Following that, we will ask the pallbearers to come forward, and then immediate family, and then the rest of us will escort Joseph on this next leg of his journey out to the hearse. We'll be able to come back in and get coats, use restrooms, and then those who are continuing on to the cemetery will get a little tag for your mirror and put on your flashing lights, and we'll proceed together. It's just about 2 miles over to Judean Gardens, where we will then conclude with the burial.
Please rise. מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת שלמה יוסף בן אליעזר ורבקה, שהלך לעולמו בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, ותצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר
Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, to the soul of Joseph Bogage, Shlomo Yosef ben Lezer Rivka, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life, and may he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. If the pallbearers would please come forward. Here, you guys. Step right on out.